Cool, man. First of all, thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure, and I've been looking forward to sitting down and doing this with you for a while. So we've kind of chatted about it off and on a few times, so it's good to get to sit down and do it. I got to train with my father, actually. I did some TaeKwonDo when I was about 7 years old. And my dad was an on-air personality for KTV Channel 7. And he and I, and he had actually done some martial arts in Canada. You know, I'm originally from Canada. I was born in Canada. I was born in Fort William. It was the Twin Cities back then, Port Arthur, Fort William. And then later the name was changed to Thunder Bay. So I'm technically now from Thunder Bay, Ontario. But when I was born there, it was Fort William. Anyway, my father had done some training in Canada a little bit. And I guess through the TV station had met somebody that was teaching martial arts in Little Rock. And at that time, we lived in North Little Rock, and the school that we were going to was off Mapleville Pike. Finest Shelnut and Fred Van Akron were running the school over there then. And so we trained for a while, and then my dad's hours changed. He was, with the TV station, and kind of precluded us from being able to continue. Just simply work, got in the way. And but it was a taste of martial arts, and it kind of stuck with me. And then so developed kind of a lifelong passion and interest. I got back into it as a senior in high school. I kind of was dabbling with some boxing, and then I signed up at just as I graduated from high school. Actually, I signed up and did a summer session prior to attending Baylor University. So I started in TaeKwonDo. Actually, even went and competed in an open tournament by the end of the summer, and then I was 17. I graduated from high school a year early, so I got to. But at 17, you were in the adult division, competed, and got my first trophy a couple of months after starting. Fought down in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, in an open tournament, and then went to Baylor. Started training in Shotokan. Trained in Shotokan while I was at Baylor during the school year. Came back to Arkansas, did TaeKwonDo during the summer, went back to Baylor, resumed the Shotokan, decided to, I laid out of school. The fall semester, I guess that would have been fall 79, spring 80, fall 80, then laid out of school for a semester and just worked, and then came back to Arkansas and resumed my education at UALR and resumed my training in TaeKwonDo, and have been with it ever since. So that's it.
What, so was it just you had doing TaeKwonDo when you were younger with your dad that kind of got you back involved with it? Was there, when you were doing Shotokan, did you have a preference to one or the other? One was more available than the other. Why did you ultimately settle on TaeKwonDo?
There wasn't, proxemics, the TaeKwonDo studio was a lot closer to the house. I had more friends that were training in TaeKwonDo. There was a guy named Bull Rogers that was a fairly famous Shotokan practitioner back in the day. He fought on PKA, fought some of the legends like Bad Brad Hefton, and Bull was a very successful Shotokan guy, but his gym was pretty much across town, and it just wasn't convenient. And the guys, because I had started in TaeKwonDo, I didn't know anything when I signed up. I didn't know anything about styles. I mean, you know, as far as I'd known, I had just done karate, you know, as a kid. I really didn't know anything about, I mean, now I do because I've researched it, but back then it was, you know, martial arts. That's all I knew. And and again, convenience. I mean, you know, I didn't know I didn't know differences in styles or anything like that. So, and the thing that I had a real traditionalist for an instructor in Baylor. And, you know, looking back at it, there was probably some really good things because such an adherence to fundamentals, but it wasn't as exciting. We didn't, you know, I mean, all we did was we drilled and we did katas, you know, we did floor drills, we did katas, and then we'd go to tournaments. Well, we weren't sparring, I mean, very much. And so, you know, katas were more designed for self-defense. They weren't designed for sparring. They're two different things, you know. I mean, sparring develops attributes that would let the technique in the kata actually work. So it's apples and oranges if it's not trained properly. And I know that my success in the tournament, you know, I mean, hell, I stepped out my first open tournament and did pretty good, placed, won several fights. And I was going in the AOK, but back then, I mean, safety equipment, when I was fighting on the open tournament circuit in Texas, safety equipment was optional. And if you got knocked out, you'd get disqualified for being unable to continue. They'd go, you know, warning, excessive contact, disqualified, unable to continue, and they'd drag you off. So it was a little bit different era. Groin kicks were legal. If you hit the ground, you had 3 seconds to follow up with a strike. So it was just kind of a different era in the martial arts. You know, it's kind of the end of the blood and guts kind of era. So I did like the TaeKwonDo better just because we were doing more sparring and we were actually preparing. And it's funny because the school I got into, it was kind of before the commercialization of the ATA, if you will. You know, I mean, they ran a little bit of a different model in the late 70s and early 80s. And then they started transforming and started becoming more and more commercial. But this was pre-Karate Kid days, you know, before the first movie. It was kind of pre the daycare TaeKwonDo, if you will. You know, I mean, it was a different time. So it was funny though. Some of the guys that were training at the Shotokan school were my sparring partners when I had my first kickboxing match. Those guys, there were some really tough Shotokan players in Central Arkansas back then. And some of them actually became really good friends because I had trained in some Shotokan. I cross-trained with those guys. And I was going to the open tournaments. I wasn't just going to the TaeKwonDo tournaments. I was also going to open tournaments. And I was competing.
Like open style, like a karate, TaeKwonDo practitioners? Yeah,
Kung Fu. Just when they say open tournaments, it's open invitational. So, you know, there's association tournaments like the JKA, the Japanese Karate Association, might run just a Shotokan only, or a Kung Fu organization might run a Kung Fu or a Wushu only tournament. TaeKwonDo, certainly with a lot of different organizations, would run organization-specific tournaments just for their people. But then and then you had the open tournaments, which were open to, you know, all practitioners. You would have and they would have hard style katas, you know, hard forms, and then soft style, the Kung Fu type patterns, and they would divide up, or they'd have different divisions. And then, you know, you fought. So that the open tournament circuit, there was a lot of TaeKwonDo practitioners from the major TaeKwonDo organizations back then, which in Arkansas were going to be pretty much the ATA and the USTF, and then later the NTFA. But a lot of the organizations, it was part of it was their business model. You know, they pushed their organizational tournaments, and they didn't compete in the open circuit. Whereas I actually ended up later on promoted a tournament on the open circuit. I was the Arkansas Karate Circuit. I was the vice president of the Arkansas Karate Circuit. Keith Kirk, a guy by the name of Keith Kirk, was the president, and I was the vice president. And so I was promoting open tournaments. In fact, I found a tournament flyer that I had from 1997 where I was promoting a tournament and I was running a grappling division. So
Nice.
it's probably one of the earliest grappling tournaments in the United States. You know, I mean, that was only 4 years post the first UFC. So kind of interesting.
Like, yeah, I know you've thrown out some dates, and you were 17 when you were, but when did Taekwondo like become so popular? I mean, obviously when you were a kid, you were doing it. Comes about in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken, out of Korea. But when did it become so popular? And you know, you talk about kind of pre-Karate Kid. Was there like a surges? Were there peaks and valleys?
It surged in popularity. I mean, it was a little more of a dynamic, feel like it was pretty dynamic. It caught the public's attention because you had guys coming over from Korea jumping and spinning and, you know, doing the flashy board breaks, and, you know, the demonstrations and the competitions were, the guys really, really talented. I mean, some of the early practitioners that came over and were promoting the art, and they were doing challenge matches. I mean, you know, it's kind of funny. Same sort of thing that the Gracies did to promote Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the Koreans were doing to promote TaeKwonDo. And then you started having waves of guys coming over that they were pushing it. And, you know, the joke was they'd get on the airplane a first degree and get off the airplane Grandmaster. So let me silence this. So that made a difference with the martial arts. And I'm sorry, man, I don't know.
You're fine.
Turn this off just a second. Stringer is on. Okay, maybe that'll quiet it down. I'll check that later. I forgot all about my, you know, since we've been in isolation and shut down, the phone just doesn't ring that much. You know, I'm here, I'm coming in while everything's shut down. I've been coming in and we've been painting and cleaning closets and just trying to do busy work, staying busy. And man, the phone almost never rings. And here I sit down, and it's like, oh my goodness, there's a phone call. Anyway, to get back to your question about when it became so popular, these guys came over, and I think they had dynamic marketing. A lot of the karate schools, and it's kind of regional, different areas of the country. I've noticed, you know, Kempo's real big and in certain parts of the country, Shotokan, but some of the hardcore, hardline traditionalists, you know, training in garages or training in YMCAs, and it was almost like, oh, you're not supposed to, an attitude of making money with your art was horrible. And, you know, then you start having people coming over and thought it was perfectly fine to, you know, spread the art and spread a love of what they did. And, oh, by the way, they wanted to make a living. I think the popularity of the martial arts after the Karate Kid surged in across all styles. I think everybody benefited from it. But I think what happened at that point, you started seeing people catering to the children's market in a way they never had before. And to make it more commercially viable, they started watering down their martial art in a way that had never been done before. You know, so you had people, of course, a guy by the name of Jun Reeves, considered, you know, the father of American Taekwondo. he invented safety equipment, and they started using safety equipment, and then for the tournaments, and then headgear, which there were more tournament deaths in point karate in the 70s and 80s because guys weren't wearing headgear. They would get hit and knocked out, and then the back of their head would hit a gym floor. Contra coup concussion that was, brain hemorrhaging people. There were several point karate deaths. I tell people all the time, I actually knocked out more people doing point fighting than I did when I was kickboxing. So, some of the old school tournaments, people were getting in there and getting after it. But I guess to make it more for the masses, they started kind of getting away from that. And then you had a generic, kind of a watering down of a lot of the schools, just to make it, more palatable to the masses. Not everybody wants to get spin heel kicked in the face or, punched really hard. And so they started kind of slacking back on it a little bit. But that's, and then you had organizations that were pushing, I think it's interesting. One of the differences between different arts, like I always have trained hard. I'm proud of every black belt and every art that I've received because I trained really, really hard, applied myself, and dedicated myself to learning. But hindsight being 2020, there were guys in TaeKwonDo, and one of the things that led to watered down TaeKwonDo is that you had guys that were making black belts in 18 to 24 months, and then they were made instructors. Well, I look at it like, man, 18 to 24 months in my jiu-jitsu program, you're a white belt. Maybe if you're really, talented, maybe you're a blue belt. For the guys that are putting in the grind and competing and training and getting the hours in the mat, certainly you could be a blue belt in that same amount of time, but you're not running an academy. And so there was, I've worked on details for longer than 2 years, just minute little bitty aspects of something. And I don't feel like you get the big picture. So the further from the source, the muddier the stream. And you didn't necessarily have master level martial artists teaching classes. Now, does every beginner need to be taught by a master level martial artist? And I'm going to tell you flat out, no, but it's nice to have a master level martial artist or a high ranking martial artist, somebody with years and years and years of experience that can kind of guide and oversee a generic program. It's kind of like being the head coach, on a football team. There's strength coaches and running coaches and specialty, quarterback and back and linemen. And, there's so many different coaches on a football team that are hands-on with the players, but you've got to have a head coach that's making sure everybody's kind of working together harmoniously. And there's a lot of those schools just didn't have that. And I feel like that led to kind of the watering down of some of the Taekwondo, because some of the old school Taekwondo was pretty hardcore.
Yeah, it sounds like in some of the stories I've heard about some of the earlier headgear being invented, it just being like the sort of piece that goes over just the back of your head. Yeah. To avoid, that was kind of like the first generation protector, I'm sure that you're referring to try and mitigate that problem of people busting their head.
Oh, for sure.
Did tournaments just not, was it not commonplace to have mats for Taekwondo events?
No. Dude, I don't think I ever competed on a mat in any karate tournament. And I stayed active until like 94. Back in the day, 5th degree was kind of like your retirement rank. And when I received my 5th degree, After I got my 5th degree, which was in 94, I kind of had stopped competing. I mean, I was competing internationally in TaeKwonDo. I was a 5-time open circuit state champion. I was the men's 3rd and 4th degree black. And this was like the tournament circuit, like you had an open tournament circuit. So you competed in tournaments and you'd get so many points for a first place, so many points for a second, so many points for a third. And then whoever had the most points at the end of the year was crowned state champion. Then in either form or fighting. And then in the USTF, the United States Taekwondo Federation, in the men's 3rd and 4th degree black belt division, I was a 4th degree black belt for 5 years. I was national champion 4 years and runner up. I missed it by 2 points one year, which still kind of sticks with me, it galls me. But I had a pretty good run while I was competing, and so I would compete. Some weekends I'd compete open circuit, some weekends, and then I would compete closed circuit. Then I was also doing for a while, I did kind of play with some of the Olympic Taekwondo stuff, which I wasn't really a fan of, but I competed in it. It was the state gold medal winner when I actually went to the Olympic trials in 88. I was also kickboxing. So, I mean, literally, go to a tournament and just have to look and see what the rules allowed, were groin kicks allowed, were foot sweeps allowed, was, finishing on the ground allowed. Did you get some of the tournaments to give you 3 points for a jump kick to the head, 2 points for a jump kick to the body, 2 points kick to the head, 1 point kick to the body? Well, that's going to affect your strategy. All punches being 1 point. Some would allow you, if you did a jump punch to the head, you got 2 points. Some tournaments, everything was 1 point. Punches, kicks, everything was 1 point. And of course, when groin kicking was allowed, in some of the tournaments, you didn't pick your leg up and just kind of dangle it out there to kick somebody in the head, because somebody would snap you in the groin real hard, and it would change up your philosophy about kicking. You had to really make sure that kick was set up. You didn't just pick your leg up and start firing. So, the scoring system, just like it does in anything, is going to dictate your strategy, as far as scoring your points, how you're gonna do time management and everything else when you're out there competing. It's going to be based on points. So that was pretty interesting, but got to do a lot of competing, and mainly, most tournaments were held in high school gyms. You'd go to maybe a boys club gym, community center gym, high school gym. And so we always competed on gym floors. That's what we competed on. So it just wasn't a lot of mats.
What were the weight classes like? Did they differ, like points differ? I know in jiu-jitsu tournaments, and if you looked at all the arts that we go take people to compete at, there's no commonality.
So back in the day, this is what they would do. Okay, tall people over here, short people over there. Okay, you 4 are lightweights. You 3 are the middleweights. You 4 are the heavyweights. So they'd kind of line you up. Now, so if you were real tall, but you were real skinny, think, Caleb Plank. I mean, he'd be in the heavyweight division weighing $145 or $150.
Man,
I was usually I was a lightweight, back then. And typically, usually the lightweight division was 155 and below, or maybe 160 and below. And then say 160 to 190 might be, or 180 would be the middleweight, and then heavyweight would be 190 and above, or 180 and above. The divisions were pretty wide. Now, it depended, like, the international competitions, you would stand on a scale. There were times that kickboxing, you would stand on a scale, but a lot of times the point tournament divisions were, you guys are lightweights, you guys are middleweights, you guys are heavyweights. And then at the end, grand champion was like absolutes, right? So, You know, if you won lightweight fighting, then you would fight the middleweight and heavyweight winner. Some of the bigger tournaments might run more weight classes. But typically, you know, sometimes it was just lightweight and heavyweight. You'd have 2 weight divisions. You know, sometimes you'd have 3. A lot of times it was just based on the number of competitors.
What about, like, so you said you were winning different state, national titles, regional titles. What did that qualify you for? If you were a state champion, did you get seeding for the next tournament season or anything
I
like
got a
that?
bunch of really cool jackets.
Nice.
You know, I would get, no, it didn't, you know, qualify you for nothing. I mean, you can take everything I told you, and $1.50 will get you a cup of coffee at most gas.
Well, I didn't know if, like, when the TaeKwonDo came in on the Olympic level, if, like, you know, with the USA boxing, or how, if they tied anything there to try and link regional stuff to national.
In '88, so there were 2 paths back then. I don't know how it is now, but back then there were 2 paths. You could be WTF, Cookie Kwan affiliate, and or you could be AAU. And I went through the AAU, so I was the AAU Amateur Athletic Union. I mean, like the people that run boxing and everything else, right? So I was the AAU gold medal winner. And so I wasn't Cookie Kwan, because being ITF, WTF and ITF was like the difference between North and South Korea. And I had no idea in any of that. ITF was first, but then WTF broke away and blah, blah, blah. And they were stylistically really, were different. ITF was a little more like kickboxing. WTF, the Olympic style, they tried to be very stylized and kind of became a sport unto itself. Think pre-Olympic judo and Olympic judo. Pre-Olympic judo was a lot more self-defense oriented and, you know, had a whole bunch of techniques in it that no longer is done in Olympic judo. You know, it became stylized for the sport. So that's what happened with WTF. You know, they took almost, you can punch to the body, you can't punch to the head. It became a very sophisticated game of kicking tag. Now, I mean, you can get knocked out with those kicks. And at the nationals, the year that I went, so being the state gold medal winner allowed you to go to the nationals, which was like the first leg of the Olympic trials. And then you had to win nationals, and then you competed with these others. It was 2 or 3 steps on down the road. So when you say Olympic trials, you got to kind of, it was the first leg. I mean, technically it was, but it was just the first leg. It wasn't like a guarantee. But you would see people there that had no business being there. And you would see some spectacular knockouts. You know, guys getting, you know, flying side kicked in the face or spin heel kicked or axe kicked. I mean, they were, I saw a lot of people get totally just wrecked at that tournament. But then when you start getting up into the higher levels, I mean, you don't see those kind of things because it becomes jockeying for position. And then, you know, fights, Olympic Taekwondo fights are 1-0, you know, 2-1. It becomes very difficult to score, you know, those higher level, because the guys are so good at timing and distancing and movement that you don't see some of the flashy stuff that you see when you see somebody who's really good fighting somebody that really doesn't belong on that stage. You know, I mean, it would be like a brand new Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt that had never competed before. Yeah, he's a black belt and, you know, he's got 10 years in and he's good, but he hasn't been in the meat grinder competing at the highest levels of the sport. And so, you know, you put that black belt in against a Marcelo Garcia kind of level guy that's just been a grinder his whole life. Man, it ain't apples and apples, you know? And so that's what happens sometimes at some of those tournaments. But I find amongst the really, really good guys, Olympic Taekwondo wasn't really all that exciting. I mean, it's never taken off. It doesn't get a lot of play on TV when they do the Olympics. It's so highly stylized. It's just not all that exciting. You know, I mean, that I'm not a fan of the Olympic Taekwondo. When you take people that are watching like an MMA fight or watching a boxing match, and when people understand what's going on, it's just like point karate's been around forever, and it has never elevated in popularity because it's hard to follow. You know, I mean, it's hard to pick out. You can see somebody that's getting dominated end up winning a fight because he played the game better and was able to score points. Or, you know, somebody, it's like a game of tag. Somebody jump up and do a back fist to the top of the head. Well, we all know that's not going to stop anybody. And he scores first, and the other guy throws a right to the body that caves him and drops him. And then the guy that did the little pity pat to the top of the head scored the point first. And to people watching, they're going, yeah, but that guy just got knocked down. You know, what's up? So point karate has never really taken off. I mean, it's been around for years and years and years, and it's never taken off because it's hard to watch. I mean, it's hard to understand what's going on. And I feel like the same thing is true. I mean, just like Olympic judo. Let's face it, it's been around forever, but you don't ever see it on TV. I mean, you know, it's never attained. For the people that doing it, it's a lot of fun, but it's hard for spectators watching it to know what's going on, and it hasn't evolved in popularity. And I feel like that's what happened to some of the Olympic Taekwondo, which is why I'm not a huge fan of it.
Why do you think some of those rules came about? Like, for example, you mentioned punches to the face. Like, one thing that always was super puzzling to me is, like, me taking, if I had to choose between getting punched in the face by you, now no offense, I know you punch really well, or a spinning hook kick, I'm going to choose the punch. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and it's because, though, think about it this way, though, is that it's easier and quicker to develop up your hands than it is your feet. So it takes more training. So the idea is to force people to develop the art, which is being able to use your feet to kick. So the tournaments, if you're not allowed to punch to the face, and then all you can do is kick, well, you're going to develop your kicks. So the rules were designed to highlight the kicking aspect of Taekwondo. That's exactly, they didn't want people. And that's why when you see two guys, like the way they clinch in Olympic Taekwondo, you got guys with their hands down, chest to chest, and nothing's happening. They're denying access to the Hogu. For that style, for that rule set, that makes sense. But if you're thinking, well, why aren't those guys hitting each other? It makes no sense. So the rules were designed to get people to kick. You know, that's what it was all about.
Did that come along with the Olympic transition? Was that in any way to differentiate it from boxing or?
Oh, yeah. No, to differentiate it not only from boxing, but from other styles of karate. You know, they were trying to, this is a totally unique art, and this is what we do, and this is how we want it done. And it was to differentiate. And so, again, when you look at the riffs, though, because I was on the ITF USA team in 1987 and fought in Athens, Greece. And so there, ITF stylist, it was more like kickboxing. You punched, it was continuous. You know, they said go, it wasn't stop and go. It wasn't like when you hit somebody, a judge would yell point and then look for clarification from all the judges around the ring. It was you continuous sparring, continuous fighting. So I like the ITF style because it was more like kickboxing, whereas the WTF was just a stylized game to show. No, and it was full contact. I mean, the kicks were, if you didn't kick hard enough to deliver what was termed trembling shock, which meant you just got the crap kicked out of you. If it wasn't a solid kick, it wasn't supposed to count. So that's how that developed. But our roots stylistically, you know, when I started, it was ATA, and I didn't know anything about ATA back then. And then the guy I was working for, when I came back from Texas, started working at a Nautilus Plus TaeKwonDo fitness center for a guy named Jim Botine. And I was a Nautilus instructor. And then when I was assisting, and I started assisting in kids classes as a blue belt, started teaching the noon class by myself as a red belt. As a plain red belt, I was on the black belt demonstration team for the United States Taekwondo Federation. I was the only red belt on the black belt demo team. And I was working for Mr. Botine when he broke away from the ATA and formed the United States Taekwondo Federation, which was interesting because there was another United States Taekwondo Federation that was here in the United States. It was headed up by a guy named Chuck Seraph. And that proved interesting later on down the road. But we were when we were on the ITF USA team, it was Chuck Seraph's USTF, because they were the ITF delegates, and our USTF, and we were kind of chosen by a guy named PK Cho. So we just had a small group of people that also got to compete as part of the U.S. delegation to the ITF World Championships in Athens, Greece in 1987. And then we ended up affiliating with a guy by the name of Park Chung Tae. Grandmaster Park was on the original ITF demonstration team under General Hong Che, who coined the term Taekwondo. And he ended up breaking away and forming the Global Taekwondo Federation, GTF. And so the Taekwondo organization, USTF, that I was with, ended up going with Grandmaster Park, and we became internationally aligned with the Global Taekwondo Federation. And so I was team captain of the U.S. team that fought in Moscow, Russia in '93. And we hosted the Russians here in the States, and then we went over there, and then they came back over here in '94. So when I was team captain for those events, and it was good competition. Those guys hit hard.
Yeah, what was it like? Now we've talked about this a little bit in the past, just you and I on the road in different places. But what was it like being in Russia right after the Cold War had come to an end?
Well, what was interesting is that there was a revolution going on in '93. There was a Russian tank shot the Russian White House, and that happened while we were there. And so we got to compete in the Olympic Stadium that was built that the Americans boycotted in 1980. So we were, I think, some of the first Americans to compete in that Olympic Stadium. But we could literally, like the tank that shot the Russian White House went past our hotel, and we could hear the machine gun fire, pop, 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 you know. And that I had a picture prior to it being shot, and then when I got back to Little Rock, there was a picture it was the Democrat Gazette then, that there was another picture of the Russian White House, and the guy that took that picture had to have been standing in almost the same place I'd been standing when I took my photo. So I had a before photo and an after photo, and you could see, you know, the burn and the hole where the tank had shot it. You could see the pock marks from the 50 cals that have been, or whatever caliber they used on their tanks, you know, chewing that building up. So, but it was interesting is that, you know, when you're really hungry, it's kind of Maslow's hierarchy of motives. when you're really, really hungry, you don't really care a lot about international or national politics. You know, we saw people, just younger people really seemed to like us. The old timers, not so much, but the young people did. And it was all about being able to have something to eat. You know, I saw lines saw this one day, I saw a truck that had potatoes in the back of it, and the line went down the street and around the corner. And I thought, man, the people around the corner ain't getting a potato out of the back of that truck. So it was different. The people there, I tell you, the Russians, because we had hosted them here in the States, our competitors, our people that we were competing against, couldn't have been nicer and couldn't have been more gracious, you know. So it was interesting. We went to there was a McDonald's in Moscow, and we went to that McDonald's, and I took a picture of me doing a sidekick in Red Square, and we called the Hogs. We almost got too much attention brought on to ourselves because we're over there calling the Hogs, and you know, all of a sudden all these security guys, they had no idea what we were doing, started coming around. But it was fascinating. It was definitely interesting.
Yeah, that would be a very interesting time to go. Just, you know, 93. So, I mean, Taekwondo's taken you some amazing places. You mentioned Greece, you mentioned Russia. That was one thing I wanted to ask you about, is just some of the other places Taekwondo has taken you. Fond memories, what have you? I mean, any other stories you would want to highlight?
Well, you know, getting to go, of course, being inducted into the official Taekwondo Hall of Fame. That happened last summer, and that was in Bangkok, Thailand. And what I thought was interesting is that I had a photographer come in, take a bunch of pictures of me in the traditional Taekwondo dobak, doing some traditional Taekwondo stuff. But the picture that they used when they put me up on the screen there was of me in a black Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu uniform, which Taekwondo normally wears white, in a Muay Thai stance. And I laughed because I thought, well, that sums up my entire career, just eclectic as hell, you know? I mean, I thought that was really cool. It was an honor to get to go over there, having, you know, with internationally, like I said, 6 gold medals and 2 silver medals, competing against the Russian teams, competing in international events, traveling, demoing. I mean, you know, I had so many good times. I spent a lot of time on the road. Got to demo when the West Coast demo team, Ernie Reyes Jr.
Oh, wow. I've seen them perform several times.
Yeah, we did a demo with them at Magic Springs. So they would demo, and then the next time, 30 minutes later, we would demo, and then they would demo, then we would demo. We did that all day down there. That was really cool. Going to Thailand was cool. I learned that the number one participation sport in the world is soccer. I mean, hands down, because anywhere you go, I mean, you don't need anything. You know, you get 2 dozen kids together, one of them's going to have a ball, and all you need is some space for them to run around and compete. So that's a done deal. But the number 2 participation sport in the world, based on participation, is based on numbers, is Taekwondo. There's over 100 million people worldwide that do Taekwondo, and I had no idea. I mean, I didn't even know there was that many people internationally that did Taekwondo. And again, you don't need anything but space. You know, I mean, if you've got a place, you got to have somebody kind of lead a class, but you know, there's not a lot required to be able to punch and kick. You know, so I thought was pretty interesting. So that was an interesting thing to learn. And it was, you know, I mean, for me, and like we mentioned earlier, I didn't get into the martial arts to be a stylist. I got into the martial arts because as a teenager, you know, I was a small, skinny kid that wanted to keep his lunch money. I mean, I was a little guy. And so I didn't know anything about style. I just wanted to learn martial arts, you know, want to learn karate. I want to learn how to defend myself. And as time has gone on, let me see if I can turn this down. Base ringer is on. So as time has gone on, I've learned that, you know, you've got striking arts and you've got grappling arts. And then, of course, studying, I was still am a voracious reader. And I studied, you know, Bruce Lee stuff, and have trained with so many different people that I kind of used Taekwondo as my gateway drug. I mean, it was what launched me into my martial arts. And, you know, I mean, I kind of always adopted that philosophy of outfighting, infighting, trapping, grappling, and on the mat, just kind of the ranges of fighting. And, but as having an anchor art for me personally, I think as far as having an anchor art for being smaller, developing up, there was a time I was pretty quick with my legs, and it was a great art to begin with. I think paired the Taekwondo style kicking paired with some Western boxing, pretty formidable. There've been a lot of really successful kickboxers that have done that.
Even in MMA, you look at people like Anthony Pettis, Benson Henderson, not on top now. I mean, Anthony Pettis still is. I mean, he's right there in the top 10 of his division. Benson Henderson's, you know, he's kind of, I don't know, he's moved over to Bellator past his prime. But, man, those guys were some amazing Taekwondo stylists in the cage.
Yeah. Yeah. They could bring out, and I think people get – Taekwondo means literally the way of or the art of the hand and foot. And so learning how to kick and learning how to punch, and then I didn't want to get too defined by style. I mean, my Shotokan influence, I think in some of my adherence to stancing, my fundamental front thrust kick, I think I still credit to my time in Shotokan. You know, it's interesting. My time, I was certainly influenced by Bill Wallace. I've been influenced by Joe Louis. Been influenced by so many different arts. Thai boxing, a guy by the name of B.J. Johnson that worked with me, and Muay Thai was my Thai coach, especially after I had done a kickboxing match. After my first match, I hooked up with B.J. But Taekwondo was a good vessel for me to start putting everything on. I mean, having a core art, and for me, it just happened to be Taekwondo, but having a solid art that you could then learn how to expand and grow and work with was really, I feel like, really important. So it's been a blessing. You know, I've loved it. My first love was kicking. I mean, I still love to kick. You know, I worked really, really hard to develop some flexibility. I had a good set of legs. I mean, it kind of fit. And, you know, body structure and body types kind of do determine, you know, to a certain extent, the success. I mean, you look at a lot of amateur boxers tend to be, you know, fairly tall and lanky, and they've got reach. They did an empirical study of boxing. There's more history on boxing data than anything. And they looked at if you were 20-0 with 20 knockouts, you had a real high power rating, you know. So they looked at, they assigned you a power rating, and then old school film reels for like I believe 16 frames to a second. And so they could measure your hand on each frame, how far it traveled frame to frame to frame, and they could assign you a speed rating. Okay, so you'd have a speed rating and a power rating, and then tail of the tape, you know, because they measure that. And of those three variables, speed, power, and reach was the single most important variable in determining the outcome of a fight. Obviously, it's Mike Tyson, of course, was a huge exception to that. I mean, there's lots of exceptions, but, you know, so you get guys that are tall and lanky, you know, they tend to do well in some of the striking arts, especially, you know, with the hands punching. Look at guys that are short and squat. They tend to be brutal in judo because you can't get under their hips. You know, I mean, guys that are, you know, low slung to the ground. So you find that, and I guess my point is just that certain styles, certain fighting types definitely favor certain kind of builds, you know. For me, being, I wasn't stupid tall, wasn't real heavy. And I felt like, you know, man, if I can learn how to kick and be pretty quick, not too many people have arms the same size as my legs. And if I can learn how to be efficient with my kicking, I'll probably be able to defend myself against somebody who's bigger and stronger. And then, you know, I've worked hard over the years to really develop my skills in my boxing and my wrist locking and my grappling, you know, and these other arts. But I was really blessed to have something that kind of spoke to me as a young man and got me hooked. And yet I'm really happy though that I wasn't a Taekwondo only. I still have a lot of love for Taekwondo, but to me it was a means to an end, and the end was to be a complete martial artist. It wasn't to be a stylist. It was to be a martial artist and to be able to pair, you know, sticks, knives, and 45s. I mean, you know, I want to be well-rounded and have and want to be, you know, I mean, so I continue with that philosophy to this day.
Excellent. Well, and that'll bring us, I think, to some future episodes, right? Because while we've really stayed on point with Taekwondo today, and my last question I kind of had to ask you, which we went right into, was what else did Taekwondo lead you to? And definitely want to sit down with you in the future and talk about your Japanese Jiu-Jitsu and training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, all your trips to Brazil, the Joe Louis and Superfoot side of your training, boxing, kickboxing, MMA, self-defense. I mean, I saw your concealed commercial you put out the other day, and man, I think that it's really awesome to just individualize and talk about all these and get your personal history with them.
Well, thank you very much. And it's, you know, like I said, Taekwondo's been so good to me in great moments. You know, beating the Russian heavyweight in a power breaking contest that I was just kind of thrown out there in, you know, and I smacked 6 boards with a knife hand strike. That's a moment that will live with me forever. And yet, without Taekwondo, there wouldn't have been a Joe Louis. There wouldn't have been Bill Wallace. There wouldn't have been Burl Parsons and the Weeping Style. There wouldn't have been Tony Manuel and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, you know, I owe a lot of really, really good times to my Taekwondo, and I just think it's great. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to sit and visit and share some of these experiences with you.
Yes, sir. Well, hey, I appreciate your time, and I'll be talking to you real soon.
Great. Look forward to it, brother.
Have a good day.
Be well.